Hi, everyone, and welcome. I am joined today by Larry Johnston, a former CI analyst and extremely popular commentator, insightful, I would add. Yeah, welcome back to the program.
I'm glad I haven't worn out my welcome. Thanks for having me.
I want to discuss with you the obviously the debacle going on with this attack on Iran. Now,
Yeah.
guess the debacle has a lot of layers to it, but. Uh, I thought perhaps we could start with looking at how you see what went wrong here, because there seems to have been an intelligence failure, because the assumption, I think, was that Israel could have a very powerful decapitation attack. Air defense systems in Iran, everything would go down. There would be panic, and then perhaps followed by popular uprising and regime change. Well, we're seeing something very different happen. How do you see this, well, as an intelligence failure, or was it simply something that went wrong along the way?
Well, yeah, I would say it was an intelligence failure sort of on both sides. So the failure on the Western part is, they spent too much time watching World War II movies and celebrating the supposed successes of the British Special Operations Executive SOE, that if that was what turned the war, guns of Navarone, and go down the list. The reality is these kinds of paramilitary intelligence operations, uh, it was very sophisticated, but this thing had been planned. The planning for it started when Joe Biden was president, okay? And so that means the CIA and British MI6 were working with Mossad. Mossad had the lead on this, but we're seeing definite crossover in the tactics because the same tactics were employed in Russia against the strategic air bases. The tactics of infiltrating drones, firing the drones from mobile platforms, i.e., trucks, and then using those to carry out specific targets. Uh, it was coordinated as well with Elon Musk because Starlink went active on June 13th, and it sure looks like that the Starlink system was used as the means to convey intelligence to these drones so that they could know who to target. So this thing was planned out, but again, it's planned out on this I'll call it the mythical assumption. The assumption is all we got to do is kill the number one guy or the top 10 guys, we kill them all. And, if only we would have killed Hitler, we wouldn't have had World War II. Well, we've got a track record with Israel killing people to stop terrorism that goes back 50 years, starting with the aftermath of the Munich Olympics and going after Black September. Uh, they've killed, I forget how many leaders of Hamas, starting with Sheikh Yassin more than 20 years ago. An elderly guy in a wheelchair, there's a big threat. Um, so this notion of the decapitation strategy, it has Hollywood glamour attached to it, but in terms of actual practical effect, it doesn't destroy these organizations. Even though the Israelis still got themselves convinced, oh, we killed Nasrallah, Hezbollah, no more threat. I mean, I've had some, I won't call them Jewish friends, but they are acquaintances who were just spinning that nonsense to me just yesterday. And it was like, seriously? I mean, these are college educated, advanced degrees, financially successful, saying stuff that's stupid. So, that was this whole effort. I think they fully anticipated that this would destabilize the Iranian regime and cause, the people to rise up, the army to fall apart. And they this was accompanied by a massive cyber attack. It wasn't just Israel. Uh, I don't have uh, actual information to back it up, but I believe the U.S. Military Cyber Command was involved with this operation, and it was designed to help clear the way. And the thought was it would disable the Iranian defense missile defense system for 4 or 5 days, maybe a week. Turns out the Iranian technicians got the system back up and running within about 10 hours. So it didn't work out as the plan. The plan was that this would be over in 24 hours. And we go back. You're the historian. You can go back through history and chart the number of wars where the leaders are saying, yeah, well, this will be over in 24 hours. It'll be over in a week. And then 6, 7 years later, yeah, hey, George W. Bush, mission accomplished in Iraq. That didn't quite pan out that way. Now, on the Iranian side as well, what this operation exposed is Iran is not the authoritarian state that we were led to believe. In other words, you had hundreds of Mossad operatives running around Iran, identifying the locations of scientists as well as military officers, constructing drones, infiltrating drones into the territory. And, Iran's intelligence service was caught with his pants completely down around its ankles. So, complete failure on that part. Despite that initial failure, they've managed to regroup pretty quickly and realize, hey guys, we're actually in a life and death struggle here. What the West didn't count on, and I guess what the Iranians are pretty happy with, is that even some of the groups that were opposed, the opposition political groups in Iran that were opposed to the leadership, they're now, we're with you. We're with you 100%. So it is actually solidified the let's call it the clerical control and the political control of the Iranian government against all these let's call it the subversive efforts that have been promoted by the West over the last 25 years.
Yeah, well, it's this assumption that if you just put the regime on its back foot, then somehow there will be this natural uprising. But even fierce opposition, people, the opposition in Iran who may hate the government, they still don't want their country to burn. I mean, this is I see often the same assumptions being applied to China, Russia, and others. Indeed, you mentioned the similarities between Iran and Russia, and this was also back in, I remember March of 2022, right after the Russians had invaded and the US and British were pushing to sabotage the peace negotiations in Istanbul. They had this, in Bloomberg, they had published this, interviews they had done with military leaders in Britain and America, and they had concluded that the only acceptable option now was regime change. So if you put enough pressure on the government, the opposition will see an opportunity to rise up and topple the government, and whatever the opposition is will be friendly to the West. This is kind of the same dream scenario we seem to be playing every time.
Yeah.
But
Well, in fact, one of my so when I went into the CIA, I was part of what was called a career trainee program. I had 52 other classmates. So one of my classmates, good friend, he was an operations officer. His job once as an operations officer was targeting Iran early on in his career. And so about 2006, he's now a senior guy within the intelligence ranks, and he was named to be in charge of Iranian task force that with the express purpose of destabilizing Iran. And I remember him saying, he's sitting there listening to all these plans about we're going to do this and we're going to destabilize, we're going to get rid of this regime, and he would go raise his hand and say, "So what comes after that?" And the answer was, "Oh, well, it'll take care of itself." So you got to give the CIA credit for being consistent, because that was the answer with respect to Saddam Hussein as well. Oh, well, we get rid of him, it'll take care of itself. They've never been right with respect. And my friend, to his credit, once he realized how sort of cocked up this whole thing was, he said, "Yeah, I'm going to take a demotion." And he took a job doing something else, which it was a reduction in pay. but he could at least sleep well at night knowing that he wasn't going to trigger an unnecessary war with zero planning for what came after. And that's the same. These nuts that think, oh, we get rid of Putin, boy, that'll fix our problem. Seriously? If Medvedev becomes president, you think Russia's going to be a little calmer? I mean, it's ridiculous. And so again, the same thing with Iran. They forget that Iran, and you've been there, you've seen it. It's a complex, organic society. It's not it's not like a Jenga tower where you just pull out one peg and the whole thing collapses. It's much more robust than that. And unfortunately, you've got a lot of childish, juvenile thinking on the part of Western intelligence.
No, I agree. I think that the I guess the way Iran is portrayed, I think incorrectly in the West, is this assumption that it's so authoritarian, there's no room for change. But the small things you see there, which can't really be explained, and thus we don't show it in the media, is for example the the way women have to be covered up. This is kind of the symbol we have for Iran to show how authoritarian they are. But when you go there, it's they don't they have laws that women have to cover their hair, but it's not enforced. So if you walk in Tehran in the markets in the evening, you see like 30% of women choosing not to have it on, walking around in jeans and t-shirts, and so it's not it's not this huge Taliban which is portrayed as. And I think
Right, right,
again, it seems very superficial to always talk about the headscarf, but this has become like the symbol we tend to lean into to show how authoritarian something is. And I think it is important because it shows that if a society is able to reform, that is obviously this is something from the grassroots, something the public wanted, and the government goes essentially saying, yeah, well, you can't, it's not worth pushing back on this too hard, so we accept some reforms. I think this is important, but we have to kind of control the narrative. So these pictures and the reality of society, you can't really have it in our media.
right.
But
Yeah, I
sorry,
was just going to say I heard the same from Max Blumenthal was there with you as well when you were in Iran.
yeah,
And, Max talked about seeing Iranian couples, young couples, being openly affectionate in public.
yeah,
And which so again, you're correct. It explodes. There is a narrative. The West is pushing a narrative about Iran as a terrorist state, which it is not. I mean, if the definition of terrorism, and I use Bibi Netanyahu's definition, which he gave to William F. Buckley back in like 1987, the use of violence against civilians for political purposes. Well, by that definition, the biggest terrorist state is Israel, not Iran. Iran has not been using violence against civilians for a long, long, long time. It's not, it has not been carrying out bombing attacks in Lebanon and bombing attacks in Syria and bombing attacks in Yemen, killing civilians. That's Israel, not Iran.
yeah. No, I actually went out for dinner there with Max Blumenthal, his wife. He even brought his 5-year-old daughter to Iran, so it's not. It's well, it's felt fairly safe, so I don't.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I saw the same. Yeah, young couples being more intimate on the street than you would expect in some totalitarian Islamic fascist state as it's
yeah,
portrayed.
yeah, yeah,
But I guess, but besides the intelligence failure, though, another huge revelation from the past few days has been Trump himself. Again, he was elected in the United States largely on a peace platform, not just peace with the Russians, but he was against all these forever wars. He got some credibility for criticizing the Iraq War. So he came off. He was elected to some extent as a peacemaker, and now over the past few days, he looked more and more as a very deceitful warmonger. That is, you know, he's was able to fool the Iranians by pretending he was negotiating while planning to strike them during negotiations. And it also seems as if this is a recurring theme. When I was in Iran, I even saw the building where the Israelis had killed the Hamas negotiator, Ismail Haniyeh.
Hania.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Haniyeh. Yeah, sorry, not too good with the pronunciation. But also they killed the Nasrallah in Beirut. And it's just I'm wondering now. Trump says, well, perhaps we can restart negotiations and bring tone this thing down, which I'm sure Iran would like to get this to an end. I mean, both sides are hurting a lot here, but to what extent can you trust anymore, though? I mean, every time there's a negotiation, there seems to be an effort of already planning to stab the other guy in
Yeah.
the back. And since you brought up the comparison between Iran and Russia, this is, when they had when they agreed on the unity government in Kiev in 2014, that was betrayed in 24 hours by the
Yeah.
Western powers. Minsk was undermined also by the Americans and British for 7 years. And then Istanbul, peace agreement or peace negotiations, also sabotaged. It's just this. I just got. It's gonna be so hard to trust the other side ever again, I think.
We got to be clear about what the objective of the United States is. And I think there's been a mistake, like with respect to Iran, that the mistake was that the U.S. is serious about negotiating an agreement with Iran so that Iran does not produce a nuclear weapon. Because, Trump is saying they can't have a nuke. Well, they don't have one. So accusing them, I'm sure I doubt you don't own a Lamborghini car, do you? So, a sports car, it's like a $250,000 automobile, 300,000. I can sit here and say, Glenn, I'm not going to let you have a Lamborghini. And you're going to go, yeah, that's how I'm living right now. I don't have one. So it's a complete red herring because this issue of nuclear uranium enrichment and building a bomb, this is all out of the Saddam Hussein playbook, going back to 2002. We can't let him, he's got weapons of mass destruction, and we can't let him have those, and we got to stop him because he's a threat to the West. That was exactly what was being said back then. And we now know that it was a full complement of male bovine excrement, which is a polite way to describe just what rubbish that was. So that's what they're using that now is the rational to justify the rationale behind this entire policy. When the policy is regime change, get rid of the Islamic Republic, replace it with somebody who's amenable, pliable, who's going to be, our house slave. They're going to do the carry, go fetch the water, going to shine our boots, going to wipe our ass. That's what we want. That's what the United States is after. And again, this notion that we're negotiating in good faith, it's just a charade. And I think, Iran's finally awakened to these people weren't serious. And I think, there's several leaders, in Saudi Arabia and Qatar and the Emirates that, this week they're starting to wake up going, wait a second, you know, Trump's a liar. Because we've watched it over. You remember day one when Israel started the attack, Trump was almost euphoric. Yeah, I told him, man. I gave him a chance. I told him you can make the deal or else, and so the deal else is coming, and we're supplying Israel with the weapons, and there's more to come, and Iran's going to be destroyed. He was beating the chest, and then yesterday, oh, different too. I didn't know anything. He went from also on the 13th claim. Oh, I knew everything. I knew the exact date. I knew it all. And then I didn't know anything. Is So it's just who trusts the guy now?
Well, on Friday, the Israelis landed a very devastating blow on the Iranians, and
Yes.
I also wasn't sure to what extent this was something that would overwhelm them. But And I think that's when Trump came in and he wanted to join in on the victory lap and take credit for, bringing down the Iranian regime. And then, of course, Iran built up and reorganized not just the air defenses, but also the military commanders, which had been killed by Israel. They reorganized, put new guys in, and then when the retaliation began to come, then of course Trump changed his tune. I mean, he doesn't want to take credit for failures. So now, yeah, now I noticed he took credit for telling Israel they weren't allowed to kill the top leadership. I mean, I have a hard time believing anything he says anymore. And
No, that's a lie. I mean, that's just a story they're putting out. It's complete nonsense.
yeah,
Yeah, I
'cause-
mean, Israel tried to kill Khamenei the first day. They were going to say, "Oh, let's kill these other people," and then what? We can give Khamenei a chance to say, "Oh, we surrender. We all you clerics go home. We're done. We're no more Islam for Iran." I mean, it's such an obscene dismissal of how deep the faith of these people are. This is not it's not like they joined a golf club because they like the crab cakes that were served in the country club. This is that it goes to their very soul of these people, and it's something they're willing to die for. That's what the West doesn't get.
and this, well, I'm also was quite shocked by, well, how far we're going now. I mean, only 2 weeks ago, um, yeah, there were the attacks on Russia's nuclear bombers, which were, well, again, attacking the nuclear deterrent, and it was clearly had the support of Western intelligence. And now, 2 weeks later, attacks on uh, Iran's nuclear reactors. I mean, this is quite extreme. And then also with some Western intelligence support, and there's no condemnation. Even the ones you think might not be involved, but you still see European leaders. The reaction is, well, Israel has a right to defend itself. This was a
Yeah.
surprise attack, unprovoked. This would be the right time to use that term. Attacking the nuclear infrastructure. I mean, this is really extreme, and they have nothing to say but lean into the old catchphrase. Well, they have a right to defend themselves, as if it is just very disorienting. This how
Well,
extreme things have become now.
so Iran is a member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Israel is not, to my understanding. Iran allows IAEA inspectors on scene with Iranian nuclear reactors. Israel does not. And yet, the lie is pushed that it's Iran who's building a nuke, while it's Israel that actually has a nuke, which it stole, the uranium used to, or the plutonium used to build the first one, they stole from the United States. And, John F. Kennedy, before he was murdered, was pressing the CIA to look into that, to expose how Israel did that. Um, so these sites that have been attacked that are above ground are peaceful sites. They're not being used for any kind of weapons development, and they were actually open to international inspectors. So that's sort of the first lie right there. What Israel and the average citizen in Israel and the United States doesn't understand is that more than 20 years ago, Iran started burying its its most sensitive laboratories and facilities underground, deep underground, so that they could not be attacked by any kind of conventional weapon and even be somewhat impervious to a nuclear device. Now, that I don't believe that means that they were uh, creating a secret bomb below ground, but they have that capability Again, they have chosen not to up to this point. Now, after the attacks since last Friday, I could see, extreme pressure coming, particularly from the military side, say, look, we've played your peace game. We've gone along, we've tried the international rules-based order. We tried to do things according to diplomacy. And look what it got us. 250 dead Iranians, more than 800 wounded. Uh, it was significant. We got several significant pieces of infrastructure destroyed. So yeah, I can see they make a case. We need to build. If we have a nuke, we don't see the West doing this to Kim Jong-un. They leave the North Koreans alone. So if we get a nuke, they'll leave us alone because that's all Iran wants, uh, primarily. But they also, to their credit, they want Israel to stop inflicting genocide on the Palestinians. And this, uh, but the West obsession with Iran is not confined to Iran because Iran is merely it's a stepping stone to Russia, and it's a step. Russia's got to be defeated, and because they ultimately the big kahuna is defeat China, and so the West is trying to pick them off one at a time. This is so these things about Iran's a sponsor of terrorism. Oh, Iran's building a nuke. All red herrings. Regime change is the name of the game.
And like you said, Iran is a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which gives it the right to have a civilian nuclear program. This is why it's so strange, because this whole thing about pressuring the Iranians to negotiate is that they should abide by the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which means that they're not allowed to develop a nuclear weapon, but have a civilian energy program. But now we see Israel, which has not signed a non-proliferation treaty and does have nuclear weapons. It is pushing Iran, and the United States is now asking Iran, or telling Iran it has to abandon even its civilian uh, nuclear program, which it has a right to pursue under the
Correct.
Non-Proliferation Treaty.
Correct.
So it's very hard to portray the Iranians as the rogue regime here when they are actually in the right if you look in international law, while Washington and Tel Aviv are the ones who are breaching it. It is, I mean, this is black and white. You can't really contest that. So, but I want to ask though, what do you see anything if the war now comes to an end? Again, it didn't work. We have a ceasefire. Where can we possibly the negotiations go from here? I mean, if you look apart away from the trust, which is shattered, but can we go back to IAEA inspections because they're starting to look more and more like a hotbed for Western intelligence. I thought they were
Oh yeah.
already acting quite dubious in Ukraine with their comments around the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, but it looks as if they've been handing over a lot of information to the Israelis, essentially targeting data, or and of course the names of Iranian scientists which are now been assassinated.
Yeah. Well, this is I don't know the extent of Iran's knowledge, let's say as of 2 weeks ago, about the how trustworthy the IAEA was. Now they know that it is it's a complete tool of Western intelligence, penetrated and carrying water for CIA, MI6, Mossad, completely compromised. And I think this is going to actually have some spillover effect. I think other countries, including Russia and China, are going to take another look at this and say, no, there's got to be a new organization because this current one is so completely compromised. I mean, Russia's run into it with the refusal of the head of the IAEA to condemn Ukraine's repeated and persistent attacks on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. They want to pretend that it was Russia doing it, which is a complete lie.
Yeah,
Um,
bombing their own
so
nuclear power plant. Not the
yeah,
three
yeah,
other ones under Ukrainian control, but bombing the ones they're controlling. This is what they kept saying, yeah.
yeah. So this is the fact that it's discredited in that way means that it's going to end up it's going to create more tensions because now there will be less information and less information sharing going forward. So this is uh, th th with the U.S. moving refuelers, air refuelers, super tankers into both Europe and the Middle East in the last 24 hours. I think there's a high likelihood that the U.S. is actually going to get involved in attacking Iran. And it's also deploying the Nimitz and some other aircraft carriers back to the region, at least in the Arabian Sea. So this thing is fraught with peril, and I think it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Yeah, that's actually was my another question I had, which is where you think we're going to go from here, because the war obviously didn't go as planned, as we can see now, Tel Aviv and Haifa and other cities being bombed in Israel. But where do you go from here? Because I see three options, and please correct me if you think I'm wrong. That is, of course, we could just pull back, say, well, let's go for a ceasefire, end the war, and yeah, pretend as this if this didn't happen. But again, for Israel, this would be very difficult, I think, because their whole deterrent now has been shattered. This is effectively their one chance to knock out Iran, so they probably won't get another chance. So this is. I don't think Israel is willing yet to to essentially accept a ceasefire. The second option, as you said, the United States, it will join because Israel is beginning to struggle. We see these air defenses especially weakened, and and this, of course, would be a wider war. Or the third would be that the Israelis break out a nuclear weapon or something like this to have a proper decapitation of Tehran. But what are other possible options here? Because it's starting to I'm not really seeing it. I don't see Israel defeating the Iranians now alone with conventional capabilities, and I don't really see them being prepared to accept the humiliation of walking this whole thing back.
Well, we can't discount the role of Russia and China in this going forward. Um, Russia's security arrangement that they signed with Iran on January 17th very much provides for direct military support in these kinds of conflicts, intelligence sharing, resupply of weapons, actually supply of other weapons, supplying electronic warfare, providing more robust air defense systems. And so that there's a whole level of expansion that will go on there. And my understanding is that's a message that Vladimir Putin delivered to Donald Trump on Saturday. Basically, he says, if you get involved with this, if you don't get this stopped, if you don't get this contained, then we're going to be backing Iran completely, 100%.
Yeah, well, I think this is one of the reasons why the Americans were reaching, or so at least Trump was reaching out to Putin to make sure that they could patch things up, and Russia would not want to anger the US by taking the side of Iran. But that's why I'm so 2 weeks after the attack on Russia's nuclear deterrent, I don't think there will be any trust or goodwill coming out of Moscow anytime
Yeah.
soon.
Well, did you notice? So Putin was the one who actually called Trump, and it wasn't a friendly call. The pretense was, oh yeah, I'm wishing you happy birthday, but it was delivering a tougher message. And Alexander Macuras did a great analysis of the statement that the Kremlin released through Ushakov about that conversation. But then said just today, 4 hours ago, the United States called up the Russians and said, hey, those bilateral talks we're going to have this week about improving relations and working out our diplomatic issues, cancel, click. So the United States is not is in fact sort of pouring some gasoline on the fire now. And the Russians reacted, stayed calm in public, but I'm sure behind the scenes they're recognizing Not only are these Americans crazy, they may be getting ready to attack us. Russia's going to have to take that seriously into consideration.
Yeah.
Trump is out of control.
Well, I was thinking, well, when the Americans or the Trump administration canceled the talks with Russia now, it's hard to see this not being related to what is going on in Iran. So, but do we have any evidence that, because I think what you're suggesting now would be probably the strongest or most likely hypothesis here that yeah, that the Americans are blowing off the Russians because of their more or less defined position on Iran. But do we know anything more from the readouts?
No, not yet. Not yet. Like I said, that just came. That was just it was a news flash. Maria Zakharova just came out and she announced, "Hey, the talks you're supposed to have this week, they've been canceled. The United States called and canceled them unilaterally." So, there's been a lot of hopium that this whole process that the United States and Russia were going to get closer together. Uh, I've maintained all along, the United States is not to be trusted. I hate to say that about my own country, but we're like a raging alcoholic or drug addict. We are out of control, and we're constantly engaged in some sort of color revolution or overseas adventure. Can't help ourselves. So,
Yeah, well, it does seem like to some extent that the negotiations now with the Russians are a bit deceptive as well to the same, or if not, well, maybe not the same extent as the Iranians were deceived. But yeah, that the purpose is to simply make sure that the Russians stay away while the US and Israel takes care of Iran and knocks it out. But for the Russians, but as well as the Chinese, I think they're seeing this more the attack on Iran as a wider attack on the multipolar Eurasian system which they're trying to
yes.
build because Iran has a very central position. Well, I guess you see it the same way then.
Yeah, I fully agree. Again, this is not about stopping Iran from getting a nuke.
No.
This is about regime change and destroying BRICS. BRICS represents an existential threat to U.S. hegemony and the U.S. the dollar controlled financial system that currently exists, and it's got to be stopped. Or at least that's this may be one effort of the U.S. to try to stop it. But the United States has got a seven trillion dollar debt problem coming up, or is it 9 trillion to refinance? And the United States is not in a strong position economically, despite what Trump says in public. This when a country's cornered like that, they do dangerous, stupid stuff. And we've cornered ourselves. It's not that we're cornered because of the actions of Russia or China. We've actually forced Russia and China into a relationship that it's going to be tough to break.
Well, I guess that's my last question. Do you see this escalating by pulling in other actors? You mentioned the United States now with this new planes landing already in Europe, and it looks like they're preparing at least for some involvement. I'm guessing the Israelis are worried that their air defenses don't seem great anymore. It seems as
Yeah.
if more and more of Iranian missiles are getting through. So again, the Americans could be there to help intercept, or they can engage in targeting Iran as well. But if the US gets involved, and I've seen some reports which aren't, I can't guarantee them, but they look credible that the Russians and Chinese are supplying Iran now, helping it to restock its ammunition and missiles to, well, defend itself. Uh, do you see a possible pathway here to this? The other great powers being drawn in a direct shooting war on, again,
Yeah,
with Iran
absolutely,
as the proxy.
absolutely. If you get Russian advisors on the ground and then they are attacked by U.S. missiles, absolutely. I mean, Russia is really put up with overt acts of war by the United States for more than 3 years. And I understand why Putin has wanted to avoid escalating that because Russia and China combined, they understand the actual cost of war. Depending on which number you use for World War II, whether it's 50 million dead total or 60 million total, if you go with the 50 million total, then China and Russia combined accounted for 47 million of the 50 million dead. I mean, they paid a horrific price. So that's why neither of those countries is actually, you've seen eager going out trying to get into wars and trying to engage with combat. Whereas the United States, we hardly lost anybody in World War II. I think our total death toll from combat casualties is like 290,000 for both Pacific and European theaters. I mean, hell, that's only a third of what Russia lost at the Battle of Stalingrad alone. So, for the United States, war is actually a profitable enterprise. Corporations get wealthy, members of Congress get wealthy, make money off of it. So, yeah, I see this thing escalating because the United States has not sat down and actually counted the risk. They don't appreciate the actual cost that the United States might have to pay if this goes sour.
Yeah, I think well, my impression is from Moscow that the Russians they want to be optimistic that there's finally someone residing in the White House who wants to talk to them, who's saying the right things. At the same time, while there's this reason for optimism, even recognizing that NATO expansion is a problem that has to be addressed. At the same time, they're seeing this massive deception, and also how long can they go on and pretend as if Washington is a mediator and a negotiator while it's American weapons, logistics, and intelligence which are killing their men every day? So it is becoming difficult balance, I guess, to yeah pursue that optimistic path while at the same time, having to recognize reality. And I think the attack on Iran now, this could shift how they view the United States as a negotiating partner. So no, this
Well,
is
no,
interesting times.
notice that similar tactics were used of using the ploy of peace talk, ceasefire talk. That was used with Nasrallah. Nasrallah, that meeting where he was killed, he was meeting with other senior Hezbollah officials to talk about, what kind of terms to agree on for a ceasefire with Israel and to find a peaceful solution. And they used that to kill him. And I would argue that these peace talks, these talks on securing an end to a nuclear weapons program that doesn't exist in Iran, was a mere pretext, and in order to basically line him up so they could kill him, which is what happened. But it did not mark the end of Iran, and it has unleashed a war now that Israel is in no position to win, simply because it lacks the strategic depth. And when I use terms like strategic depth, we're talking about, do they have an arms industry that they can produce the weapons that they need, particularly air defense missiles, artillery shells, bombs? No, they don't have that. They're entirely dependent upon the West for that. Do they have ample manpower reserves that they can call on? No, they're a tiny little country, 8 million, and they don't really have much of a standing army because they're heavily reliant on reservists. And yet now they're basically fighting a five-front war. They're fighting in Gaza, they're fighting in West Bank, they're fighting in Lebanon, they're fighting in Syria, and now they're fighting this air war with Iran. And one of the problems with the air war, the F-35, which has been sort of a main part of their ability to attack, it's what is known as a hangar queen. It is very fragile, requires lots of maintenance. I understand that the for every 1 hour of flight time, it requires 10 hours, 10 to 14 hours of maintenance. Well, one round trip back and forth from Israel to Iran is at least 4 hours. So, right there, you got 40 hours of maintenance for every plane that makes that trip. That's, that's a full work week with 8-hour days. So it's just, my point is this, Israel is not equipped to sustain a war of attrition, whereas Iran can sit there and launch missiles all day long. Because just as the Houthis showed, you put those on mobile launchers, and the West's ability to track, locate, and destroy very, very limited.
Well, Larry Johnson, thank you so much for your time, and yeah, I'm hoping this yeah, someone will come to their senses. At least at this point in time, it looks there's only two options: either ask the Iranians to, yeah, for a ceasefire to end this, or otherwise there has to be some dramatic escalation, and yeah, hopefully we won't get there. So thank you again for your time.
All right, my friend. Thanks, Glenn. Always a
Thanks.
pleasure.